Hello everybody and welcome to what I'm hoping is going to be a very fun video. My name is Joshua and I'm the writer of the Winx Chronicles, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different. Over the past couple of weeks since releasing the project, I've been reading through all of your comments and your messages and your theories and kind of getting a gauge of the reaction and reading some of the questions that you guys have about the book one in general, and also the future of the Winx Chronicles. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for engaging with it, for entertaining it, for reading it, for spending your time with the story. It's been really surreal as I've been living with it for the best part of 5 years. So yeah, keep them coming. I really do love reading whatever you guys have to say, both positive and negative. I take it all on board. However, I thought it would be kind of fun to do something like a making of episode, a sort of behind the scenes look as to how the Winx Chronicles actually came to be, and basically talk a little bit about the project itself and where the idea first came from, how the world and the magic system were built, how I made some of the decisions I did, why I made some of the decisions I did, and how the book and the project has slowly evolved over the years. And yeah, hopefully kind of clue you guys into all of the creative decisions that I've made along the way. Some of you have been following this project for a really long time now, all the way back when I first released the prologue, I believe in 2022, and others of you are only just discovering it now. I have asked you guys on Instagram and on YouTube to submit your comments. I've also been going through the comments and my DMs, and I've kind of collated everything here, so that Q&A section will be at the end of the video. I do want to issue a spoiler warning for book one, obviously through the whole video. This video will be filled with spoilers for book one. So if you haven't read the book and or if you care about spoilers, I would wait before listening to this. Go read or listen to the book and then come back. Or if you don't care about that much about spoilers and you just want to know and you're hungry for it, you are more than welcome to stay around. I'm also going to say for the Q&A section, there are going to be, I guess, mild spoilers for the rest of the series. It's stuff that I'm pretty sure you could guess. However, I'm just going to state that there are going to be some mild spoilers for book 2 through 6. So if that's not something that you want to know and you want to go in completely blind, I would recommend not listening to that section of the video. And I will kind of say if I'm going to utter a spoiler for anything as and when I do for book 2 onwards. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into talking about this project, why I did it, and yeah, how we got to this point in 2026, because it's quite a long process. So I think we have to start with my connection to the Winx Club, the original show, Winx Club. It's one of the formative shows for me from my childhood, and I think, you know, any early 2000s baby or 90s baby as well really had this incredible palette of television that they were given on a silver platter, and Winx Club was one of those many shows. It was like I had this personal connection to it because I have Italian heritage, my mum's Italian, and I really vibed with the themes of the Winx Club, which was power, femininity, friendship, identity. These were really important to me as a kid. I didn't really see a lot of other boys who were like me, so I honestly really loved the idea of 5 girls at the time fighting crime in sparkles and high heels. It was something that spoke to me. What can I say? And I think it spoke to a lot of people because obviously Winx Club has gone on to be what it is now, which I think in the good Lord year of 2026, a lot of people are coming out of the woodworks as Winx Club fans and remembering how good this show was from their childhood. But yeah, I have always loved Winx Club. It's been a show that has been uniquely mine. I've never let it go. It's been something that's been with me all my life, and it will probably be with me for the rest of my life as well. I know these characters. I love these characters. I love this world. So yeah, this project really was born from a place of love of the original. But in order to talk about the Winx Chronicles rather than Winx Club, we kind of have to start at Fate the Winx Saga, because funnily enough, I don't think if there was no Fate, the Winx Chronicles wouldn't exist. Because I think Fate was the spark that lit the fire that became the Winx Chronicles. So we have to take ourselves back to 2021. I would like to get us all in the time machine. We're going back to our year of 2021. Or I guess this would be 2020 because I'm pretty sure the kind of teaser trailer was dropped in 2020, like December. But around this time, I remember It was a really long wait for a Winx Club live action. It was like a decade of teasing. I'm pretty sure there was this graphic. Someone please tell me if I'm imagining this or like fever dreaming this, because I'm pretty sure this existed. There was this graphic that went against this like black sparkly background. It was like black and white sparkles. They were wearing these weird outfits. We'd never seen them in before. And I'm pretty sure they were in their like couture fashion style. And it was captioned with like the Winx Club are coming alive. Does anyone else remember this, or is this just me like hallucinating? Somebody help me in the comments below. But I'm pretty sure this was kind of where the teasing of a live action Winx Club started. And I honestly think like the idea of seeing the Winx Club in live action was something that was so alluring to so many people. Like I always wanted it. I thought it was going to be incredible as and when they did it. And so there was a lot of excitement and kind of anticipation around the Fate release. However, I think by the time we had seen the trailers and we had seen the direction that the show was going to go in, I think that was definitely muddied with a little bit of apprehension as well. I was definitely apprehensive. By the time Fate came out, I'm going to give it some credit where credit is due. It wasn't a total train wreck. It was definitely different, and it was definitely, I think, difficult to adapt. Netflix, I don't know if they were the right people for the job. I also think kind of the like Fate the Winx Saga was a product of its time. I think we were kind of in the era of Netflix Riverdale-ification of everything. And unfortunately, Fate the Winx Saga got that treatment. I think if Fate the Winx Saga came out today and, you know, Netflix people were tasked with it today, we would have gotten a very different show. At least I'd like to think we would get a very different show. And I do think they've taken the notes on board a lot with what they got from like Fate the Winx Saga, and they've applied it to shows, you know, that kind of with the same MO as like Avatar The Last Airbender, for instance. So yeah, I would like to think that we've moved on from this era. However, unfortunately, Fate was marred by this era. And I have to give credit to films like Barbie for breaking us out, because thank God. So yeah, I just really sat with Fate for a while, and I just felt like there was a lot of missed potential. In fact, I remember making a video at the time on my old YouTube channel. This was like 2021, and it was like 50 minutes of me just talking about Fate and what I hated, what I didn't, all of this stuff. So yeah, I was really upset about it at the time. And, you know, I didn't totally hate it, but I was like, these aren't my girls. These are not my girls. This was the first time I thought in the back of my mind, I was like, I can do better. I can do better. And it wasn't in a, you know, I can do, you know, better than everyone on this entire, you know, production. Like, obviously there are hundreds of people going into making something like Fate the Winx Saga, but it was more so, I felt like not a single one of those people, or it didn't seem like anyone kind of higher to the top, really cared about the original show like they should have done. No one cared about what it stood for. No one really bothered to sit down and think about, what is Winx Club saying? I think they just thought, it's a popular show, we're going to take the characters and we're going to transplant them into this world. And this was something I really wanted to avoid in the Winx Chronicles when I, you know, later when I started really thinking about it. And I hope I did. Obviously, that's not me not for me to decide. That's on you guys to decide. But yeah, I felt like Fate the Winx Saga were just so soulless of the original show. And I think they did bring it back around for season 2 in many ways, but I just don't think it was enough in the end. So yeah, I mean, it was weird. I wasn't in the online fandom at the time. I wasn't, you know, I'd been a Winx Club fan for so long, but I definitely wasn't in the fandom. And I just remember at the time just starting to gradually build up certain things. I remember building maps, and, you know, I started on the magic system, but it really wasn't much at this point. I remember just thinking about the world and the lore a little bit. But at this point, I wasn't thinking it's going to be a novel. You know, I hadn't really had anything concrete at this point. However, over the course of the year, that did start to change. This was 2021. I remember I just sat down one day and I remember writing the prologue. And the prologue, I think, was something that existed in my head. I was like, this is how the show sort of should have started. And you know what's so funny about this is that I remember saying to my friend at the time, this is how I wanted the show to start. It needed to start with the destruction of Domino. And you see how in the live action Avatar The Last Airbender, that's how it started. It started with the destruction of the Air Nomads. And I was like, you know, call me crazy, but this is the Winx Chronicles. And that was however long after I'd written the prologue. So that was where the prologue came from. I remember sitting down on Wattpad of all places, and I've scoured to try and find this original text, right, of the original prologue, because I really wanted to put it in it's like historic text. I really wanted to put it in the PDF download, but I couldn't find it anywhere. The only thing I could find was from when me and my friend at the time, we put it into Google Docs and we edited it together, like with the comment section editor. That was the only version I could find. I couldn't find the original. I'm very upset about it. I only have the Docs version left. It exists in the ether likely somewhere. However, yeah, I remember writing the prologue. I hadn't planned anything. I was just like, I have to get this from my mind onto the page. And what's funny is that the prologue to this day is still one of my favorite pieces of writing that I did for the entire book. I honestly, it's like, yeah, my favorite, if not my favorite scene. I just really love it. I just think, yeah, it really does capture what the Winx Chronicles is about. I think it immediately sets the tone. And I remember reading a lot of later down the line, I felt like I'm skipping ahead. I have like a little, notes thing here so I don't skip ahead. However, I'm going to skip ahead slightly here. I remember later when I started, actually compiling the book together, a lot of it was like, oh, don't do a prologue, don't do this, don't do that, in the like fantasy writing videos and stuff like that. But I just felt like this prologue was so needed for the Winx Chronicles. There was a sense of dramatic irony in revealing Bloom's identity, like we as the reader are meant to know it. And I think it's only something that I could have gotten away with in the setting of a fan fiction project where 99.9% of the people who are going to listen to this book already know that Bloom is the Fairy of the Dragon Flame. They already know Bloom is the Lost Princess of Domino. They already know all of these things. So I felt like it was kind of, this was my justification obviously later, but I felt like it was kind of, it was a deliberate decision to say, okay, I'm obviously not going to get any of this kind of who is Bloom tension in the book because we know who Bloom is. The reader knows who Bloom is. They're going to because it's fan fiction. So how can I create something else, create a different type of tension? And that tension came in the form of dramatic irony. And that was like one of the biggest decisions of like revealing that so early. So obviously after I wrote the prologue, I was a little bit like, okay, I'm just going to build this world out more. It was really organic. It wasn't planned as a series. At this point I had the prologue and I was kind of like, okay, maybe let's draw maps and explore how the magical dimension functions. I thought about the geography, the politics, the culture, the travel, the societies. I was like, what do these places look like? How do they function with one another? Why do they function this way? This was also the time that I kind of made the decision to kind of collapse all of, the major players in the magic dimension onto one planet. And I'll talk about that decision later, but I feel like a lot of the time it feels like there's more in Winx Club than there actually is. If you really think about it, Planet Magix in the original is 3 schools and a city. And then there's that like wild zone area. I'm pretty sure that's on Magix that they go to in season 2, that they can't use magic for some reason. That place, is that on Magix? Anyway, the source doesn't give us much in terms of these being huge planets, So I felt like having them as realms, as they're so frequently described in the Winx Club, having them as realms, it was a much better, having them as continents. And, I still had to build out, you guys have seen the map. I had to build out so much extra stuff just to fill these realms up. And I still feel that they're quite empty, considering how much space these, places actually occupy. However, that was that decision. And I, obviously I preserved a lot of the kind of like space opera stuff with other places, like with Vesperia, Omega, Arcadia. Yeah, it will get to that point later. And obviously we have also the 2 moons of Magix, Sidereal and Zenith. We'll get there, However, I felt like season 1, let's keep it on Planet Magix. I understand it feels a little bit like, I guess, small at the moment, but again, I think that's because we don't look back at Winx Club and, remember a time when it was small, but there was a time where we spent an entire season just between those 3 schools, like we never left it in season 1. So I felt like that was an important decision that I made, and also it is important for the plot later on. You guys just have to trust me on that. But anyway, so once I'd kind of mapped out the solar system and I was thinking about the magic system, I took a really big inspiration from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I mean, I think this is, obvious to anybody who's read the books. Yeah, I don't want to say I stole, but I take heavy inspiration. One could call me a crook by how much inspiration I took from Avatar: The Last Airbender. However, I don't think it's subtle. I think anyone reading it kind of, understands that. But I definitely laid over the kind of Winx Club, sparkle over top, I think. And yeah, I knew I wanted a magic system that was harder than softer. I'm definitely not, from the school of Tolkien when it comes to that sort of thing. I'm definitely more from the school of Sanderson. Harder magic system, logical, internal sense of logic. That's what I wanted, especially because I knew Winx Club had this, air of sci-fi over top. So I felt that really did fit the world much better than their kind of original, very like non-fleshed out magic system was. Although, I love it. I love the original magic system with all the different transformations that just keep going. And obviously I did try and incorporate all of the powers and how all of that was going to work with the magic system that I ended up creating. But I did want something that felt a lot more succinct, and it had rules and it had limitations. And not only that, it would also drive a lot of the plot and a lot of the themes in the story, which obviously you started to see with the fairies and witches kind of debate. Yeah, it was difficult kind of thinking how much of this magic, how much of this wonder, for lack of a better word, it's a very important word in Winx actually, the word wonder, more to be revealed. But how much of that do I maintain, and how much of it do I get rid of for the sake of a cohesive, fantastical world? It's kind of like you're gambling a little bit, you're almost like trying to maximize your skill points, is how I felt in a lot of these like early, the early days of writing the project and coming up with the world that this place would come in. And I definitely built the world before I wrote the plot, and I think it was when I was building the world, I actually, I remember I was reading Here's Dark Materials at the time, or rereading, I should say. Here's Dark Materials is my favorite book series of all time. I absolutely adore it. If you haven't read Here's Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, would highly, highly, highly recommend you stop what you're doing right now. Literally immediately pause this video, go and pick up the first book. I think it's called The Golden Compass in America, but I think the rest of the world is called The Northern Lights. Again, heavy influence from Here's Dark Materials on the Winx Chronicles. One could call me a crook. Heavy influence. Yeah, it's my favorite fantasy series of all time. I remember I was reading it, I was like, oh, that's the story. And it was kind of like, as I was world building, the story, the grand plot of the Winx Chronicles really came to a head. I was like, oh, it makes sense. And that was when I was like, okay, this is now, these are novels. This is going to be a 6-book series. I was like, okay. And these are the book titles. I was like, they're going to be called Fate, Secrets, or at the time, actually, book 2 was called Power. So it's like Fate, Power, Enchantment, Secrets, Nemesis, and Wonder. I was like, yes. I'm cooking. Yeah, this is it. I was like, this is the story. But it wasn't really the story because it was just the overarching plot of the series. But this was, I think, the point where I was like, oh, okay, this has to be written. I have to write it. And I think this was also around the time I made the original post onto the Winx Chronicles Instagram, where I was like, I'm stating the mission statement. I think I did have some like apprehension about writing fan fiction, not because it's fan fiction, but also because I really, really wanted to write something original. However, there was a big part of me that was like, I think that I can use this project as almost like a testing ground for my writing, for my skills. So like, follow through on a project. I felt that was so important. I think that by the time I kind of taught myself through that, and I was like, actually, I'm going to do it. And I also was a little bit like, as I said earlier, I didn't want to just come up with a story and then transplant the Winx in it. So there was a part of me that was like, maybe I should just take what I've done and apply it to a new world at this point. I can just literally just rename the locations. But then I was also like, no, I feel like I have to, the Winx girls this is their world. And I just couldn't separate the Winx Club from the stuff that I'd done. And I think it was also there where I was like, okay, if I can't separate these two things and they are inseparable, in my head at least, then I feel like, this is a Winx Club story. It's not just a story, this is a Winx story. So yeah, once I'd committed, I was kind of in my 3rd year of university and I wanted to do it properly. And I'd settled on the 6-book structure and I started to write book 1. And realistically, I remember releasing the prologue just as like a teaser at the end of 2022, but I had almost nothing from book 1 at this point. I had a very, 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 very early first draft, like of some scenes, but I didn't know how the theme or how anything was going to interact or how we were going to get there by the end of the book. So yeah, it was a really, really long road, and I really struggled with chapter 1 particularly. Chapter 1, act 1 in general was such a big struggle, and I think I struggled there because I struggled with Bloom, And to be candid, I don't find Bloom a very interesting character in the original Winx Club show. It's not like I dislike Bloom. I'm not a Bloom hater. I just find her to be so, compared to the other 5 girls, to be so lackluster. And because we're forced to spend so much time on her, I think she definitely functions as like we as the audience can project onto Bloom. However, I didn't want that to exist for the Winx Chronicles per se. I definitely wanted Bloom to have something more to her than that. And I think finding what that was a lot of the hold up. And because obviously Act 1 is very driven by Bloom, and I also needed Act 1 to play into the rest of the story. It did need to set up for what was going to happen on Magix, and I was kind of like, I hate the fact that, you know, I have to start on Earth, and there was a part of me that was like, maybe I should just start on Magix, but I was like, no, Earth is important. I have to set this up. Like, I have to kind of show her in this world. So yeah, it was a lot of back and forth. I remember there was a whole like set of alternate openings and different versions. We had like Detective Bloom at one point where she was like trying to figure out who was killing all of these people, or who was responsible for them disappearing children from her school. And there was like a warehouse where she was like camping out. I don't know why she was there, hiding from the cops. I remember there was one where she was already arrested, and that was a good opening. Can't lie, guys, she was in prison. These things genuinely existed, and I cannot remember which versions I put in the PDF, but these openings all existed at one point. And honestly, some of them would have made for an interesting opening. However, I really had to take a step back and really think about Bloom, because I was like, what character is she? And I think kind of having her, the kind of fervently mediocre, I think is how I described her. Like, she's blazingly normal, to the point where I think when people say in a book, or when it's established that the character is kind of normal, there's nothing special about them, they kind of like are misfits. And in being a misfit, they become not normal. They become special, because you can't have a misfit character that blends in. You just can't. Misfits will, by their nature, stand out, and that is what makes them special. But with Bloom, I really wanted to establish, whether I was successful or not, again, up to you guys, I wanted to establish her as a truly normal girl, someone who was not extraordinary and did not believe herself to be extraordinary. She didn't have problems at school. She wasn't silly. She wasn't particularly smart. She had dreams. She had aspirations. She had all of these things going for her. She had a normal life, and she didn't really have anything that wasn't any, you know, antagonistic force in her life, maybe other than Mitzi. I felt that it was important that when she had to make the choice to leave Earth, she was leaving something fully formed behind. And she had to make that choice, because that choice, and that we choose our own destiny, we choose our own fate, is such an important theme of the first Winx Chronicles book. You know, I'll talk more about theme later and how I tried to weave that throughout the novel. But, you know, this first instance of Bloom choosing, you know, not to go with Stella, for instance. She literally chose to not believe what she saw with her own eyes, because she wanted this, you know, reality that she had already constructed for herself to be true. You know, she didn't want any part of it. And it wasn't until she was literally basically forced by the creature to confront that part of her, where she started to realize, this is A, real, but B, I now have a choice. And I think Bloom hated that choice. Bloom did not enjoy making that decision, and she spends the entire novel wondering if she made the right choice or not. So this idea of choices, this idea of fate, this idea of destiny really is something I needed to weave into Act 1, and it wasn't until I kind of came up with how Act 1 was going to go that I think the rest of the book followed. You know, Act 2, 3, 4, I should say 2A, 2B, and then 3, really depended on Act 1, and it was Act 1 that I struggled with the most. And this was the bit that took me a really, really, really long time to get down. And it wasn't until I'd finally finished Act 1 that I was like, okay, now I can go and I can structure book 1. A lot of that structure came from another author who I guess I decided to be a crook and steal from, is Mr. George R.R. Martin, the writer of Game of Thrones. And for the astute amongst you, you may have noticed this. The A-plot of book 1 is basically the same as A-plot of book 1 from Game of Thrones. I stole it, as I said, because I'm a thief. And I just thought it was genius how George did this. He, for those who don't know, haven't watched the show, haven't read the book, in the first book of Game of Thrones, Martin understands that he has to, introduce us as the reader to this world. He has to introduce us, just as I had to introduce you guys to this new conception of magics. But George R.R. Martin does it so expertly, and he did it through the guise of having the A plot be a mystery. Who killed Jon Arryn? It was a murder mystery book. And I wanted to try and emulate that as best as I could for the Winx Chronicles. And the driving question that really brought book one together was when I was like, okay, who tried to assassinate Princess Stella? So important. And it also played into one of the big problems I was having. So I was like, why is Stella on Earth? Why is Stella on Earth? Why did this happen? Is it fate? Is it destiny? Or is it something that is, someone behind the scenes has been pulling the strings to make happen? And again, I think that's something that the book consistently asks us to consider. I used the Save the Cat plot beats. If you've heard of them, I think they're so useful. I'd highly recommend reading the book. The book's on script writing, but you can apply it to any story. So wonderful, so good. You can just lay them out and you can put your beats of your story up against it, and it just makes for a really good, nice way to outline or just begin your outline. Obviously, I think sometimes you kind of got to break the rules a little bit, but it's a wonderful outline process, and that's what I use for this first book. As I was kind of structuring the rest of book one of my goals was to make the magical dimension feel more realistic rather than just utopian. I feel like it does feel very utopian in the original Winx Club. Like, there really isn't much antagonistic force kind of outside of our main cast of villains, and I wanted that to be untrue in the Winx Chronicles. I wanted there to be definitely an element of political intrigue that I wanted to weave in, obviously with the who tried to assassinate Princess Stella plotline. I wanted to introduce conflicts for our main villains. Obviously the Tricks are our main villains kind of book one. There needed to be room to kind of build them out more as the books went on as well, and kind of not necessarily selling you guys a viewpoint, but also trying to ask a question. How much of this is right, how much of this is wrong, is something that I wanted to do. And I didn't want the book to necessarily give you an answer. I just wanted it to ask the question. And it's one of those things where I may or may not have been successful in that. It's kind of up to the person who's reading the book. But yeah, I also had to really shift the narrative away, I guess, from like all of the Winx girls, because I really did, in early versions of the book, I tried to basically get every single character in there and try to, expand them all and give them all plot lines, but it was like, it's really, really difficult in a book that I was like, I know it's going to be basically 120,000 words, and it just felt so bloated with all this extra material. And there's definitely some stuff that you get in there, like with the Musa and Aisha, or I should say Layla, like scene that you get in Act 2B. I definitely think you get those moments, but I don't think any of the characters are as built out as Bloom and Stella are, and that was definitely deliberate. But I do think we needed the time with Bloom and Stella because they're going to be two of our main characters throughout all of the series, and we can go back to the rest of the Winx girls, to the boys. We can introduce other characters later on. So I really did have to accept that limit of not having a large cast, because not everyone can be developed equally, and I just had to develop those anchor characters, especially in book one. And just make sure I kind of planted the seeds for everyone else to have deep arcs, like the Tricks, like Diaspro. Obviously Riven will come in later, all of the Winx, it'll come later, but I just couldn't do that in book one. And it was, again, one of the things that I really struggled with for a long time. That kind of moved on to, as I was touching on earlier, a lot of the themes of the story that I wanted to work in. And I think theme is really tricky. And again, one of the things I struggled with, because I struggled with everything on this book, to be honest with you, but I really struggled with theme and like what it was that I was trying to say. But I think from the get-go, I knew it was about this idea of like fate and choice and destiny, and the idea that we control our lives and we have power within us to afflict change. And I think in the end, it definitely came out, like whether consciously or subconsciously, to be honest with you. It was about characters born into the roles versus choosing who they are, and like people born into power, people not, decisions that can put us into powerful positions and decisions that strip us of power. It's about Bloom's tension between what she feels is her destiny and her self-perception of that destiny. And I think she struggles throughout the whole book trying to think, what is it that I was meant to do? She was asking herself, what was I meant to do? What was I supposed to pick? but she doesn't realize until the end that actually it doesn't matter what she picked. She picked what she thought was right because that was her choice. You know what I mean? There's definitely elements of power and power imbalance that came into it. Obviously with the witches and fairies storyline, there's elements of like things aren't what they seem. It's like a recurring idea, a surface level and a deep truth. Kind of see this with like Daphne and how she was purported in history. You see this obviously with Bloom herself, like she looks like an Earth girl, had all of this power underneath her. There's definitely a lot of that in there as well. Like there's definitely a lot of themes, and obviously then there's the standard stuff that you can't get away with Winx Club, where it's like friendship, found family, femininity, characters learning to see beyond appearances. There was a lot of theme that managed to wind its way in there. I don't think it's like masterful thematic execution by any means. It's definitely something I have to work on. Another one was I'm thinking of now is like identity. I guess that does play into the idea of fate as well, and the conflict of who you are and who you think you are and who you are expected to be, I suppose. So yeah, that was kind of that's my spiel on theme, but I am going to work more on that in book 2. And the main theme of that one is obviously secrets. What do we not tell people? What do we hide from people, and what effect does that have on our relationships with others? What secrets do people have? So that's something to look forward to. It's definitely something I'm going to try a lot harder at. Now I've obviously written one book, I feel like I can do it much better. I guess now I'm kind of moving on to some of the questions. I'm going to answer some of the questions that I've had consistently from the beginning since releasing the book, because I'm going to be talking about like some of the character decisions I made. So I guess like loose spoiler warning for book 2 onward now. Yeah, I think I've already spoken about how I kind of like found it really, really difficult handling the amount of characters in book 1. I think having 6 main characters in general is difficult, which is why I had to boil it down to 2 eventually. It was like one of those things where I was like, okay, it's a lot of like groundwork to do. Introduce a world, introduce characters, do all of these things in 123,000 words. It just wasn't enough time. So I think a lot of the comments I've gotten, which is valid critique for sure, is I feel like you didn't do enough with this character, and I would agree. It's more so just give me another book or 2. You know what I mean? I haven't forgotten about them. It's more so I had so much to do, and I felt like this book could have been double the length, but for the story, for the plot, it needed to be the length that it was, maybe like slightly longer. That was kind of the tension I had, I think, with myself, the creative struggle I had, I suppose. I had to make really deliberate choices as to like what I was focusing on and what I set up. I wrote here Stella is the easiest character to write. I don't know why I just wrote that randomly in the middle of this, but I guess I'll mention it. As I said, I found it really difficult to write Bloom. However, contrastly, I did not find it difficult to write Stella. Stella as a character, I loved. I loved to write. I thought that writing Stella was like my favorite of all of them. Every time I got to write some Stella stuff, I was like, thank God, because yeah, her dialogue, everything that she did, everything she stood for, I was like, I understand. Bloom as a character, do not get really, but I had to do a lot of work so that I could write her convincingly, because as well, she's kind of our POV character. I think another thing that really drove Bloom as a character was this like idea, and this is going to be something that becomes more apparent as the books go on. It wasn't necessarily a really big theme in book 1, but definitely an overarching theme for Bloom is this idea of like chasing the idea of being extraordinary when you feel ordinary, because you feel like being extraordinary is what makes you matter. It's such a big thing for Bloom, and it was kind of set up when Vanessa and Bloom had a conversation when Bloom came back to Earth, and she has always felt that way about herself, and I felt that that was another thing that I really had to get like and hone in on Bloom to really understand her as a character. And I think I'm going to learn more about Bloom as I wrote her more. I really wanted to introduce Layla in this book. I really had to have her in it. It was a character that I swapped her out with Riven, to be honest. In the end, I think it was a decision of having one or the other. And I think if I included Riven, he would have had a lot of driving force and we would have gotten more time with Musa. But equally, I felt that it was more important to focus on the girls rather than focus on one of the guys in the books. So I did prioritize including Layla as an intentional character in this book. And I also wanted to introduce her earlier, which is why we met her in Chitaluce, because I didn't want to introduce 4 characters at the same time. So that was another thing, and I guess one of the reasons why I had that entire section is literally just to introduce Layla and kind of show the villains kind of onto them a little bit. You know what I mean? Riven, as I said, I had to cut just because it's more so I had to delay him. He's going to be coming in the next book, but he just has so much to do. and I know a lot of people really wanted to see him. I know he's like a fan favorite character. I'm going to try and handle him well. I haven't changed much about his internals, but his story has been kind of overhauled. So I hope people don't hate me after they find out what I'm going to do with Riven, because he's a very flawed and complex character worth developing very slowly. I also feel that about Diaspro. I had a similar comment about Diaspro. They felt like I could have done more with her. And I do agree. It's more so that currently Diaspora is where she needs to be. And it's very similar to the Tricks, because they have to start somewhere. Diaspora and the Tricks have to start at this point, and how they're going to be handled throughout the books is going to be the interesting stuff. I think it's more of like a bear with me with those characters. I have plans. It's just a case of whether I'm able to execute them or not. So we will see. I really want to have these like gradual character developments throughout the whole series with all of our characters. And I think it's difficult to like remember, because we obviously know the whole story of Winx Club. You know, we have had 8 seasons of it, that book 1 needs to show beginnings, not finished versions of these characters. These are the beginnings, the original versions of these characters, and by the time we get through the whole series, they're going to change so much, they're going to grow so much. And that's true of our main leading ladies and also all of the side characters around them, if I do my job correctly. Now we're moving on to the Q&A fan questions of this, I guess, little podcast video. There's quite a few, and obviously I've already issued a spoiler warning. However, I'm going to reiterate again, spoiler warning, minor spoiler warning, but still a spoiler warning for book 2 onwards. So let's get with probably the biggest one. There's quite a lot about the Layla Aisha debacle, whether she'll be eventually called Aisha, and the short answer is yes. Layla is Princess Aisha. They're the same person, and there's a reason behind the switch, and it will be explored later in the series. However, we already know kind of why royalty switches out and why these things can happen based on, you know, we already saw it with Brandon and Prince Sky. But Aisha's like story is a little bit different, and she gets a lot to do in book 2. It's going to be something that's really, really explored in the second book. So yeah, Layla and Aisha, they're the same. I just thought it was fun that we had Layla in there somehow, and that she eventually became Aisha in the second book. So we do meet her in the second book, as we did in the second season, but we also have her as a character in season 1. Do you know what I mean? I just thought that was like a fun play. I think I've already addressed this, but I've gotten questions about like, where's Riven? Are the Pixies and Helia going to appear? And the short answer is Riven is in the next book, the Pixies are in the next book, Helia is in the next book. They're all coming. It's going to be a longer book, more character-focused book. I've also had questions about Chimera and Darka. Chimera will definitely appear. She's already been referenced in the story, although not by name yet. Darka, or the Shadow Phoenix, is slightly more complicated a question, and as much as I've said spoilers, I'm not going to spoil too much about the Shadow Phoenix because it's very important, and I'll just leave that at that for now. Another question I got a lot was the Magic Winx outfits, and why this version, in the version of the story, why are they designed by Stella rather than simply appearing as part of the transformation. And I made this decision mainly because I felt that the magic system and having it kind of more rooted in a internal sense of logic with the world made the most sense, keeping it as this is for now. So having their Omnis kind of function as their kind of transformation devices, and having Stella make the outfits, I felt as well kind of added that element of like Stella did this for them. It was kind of a moment for her, like she designed those outfits because she thought of them in her way she cares. And also I wanted a way to differentiate Magic Winx from Enchantix is another really big reason, because with Enchantix, and this isn't really a spoiler because you saw it in the prologue, the clothes do appear as part of the transformation with Enchantix. So it's like a separation between these two transformations. One of them is traditional fairy, wonder, magic. The other one of them represents this more rooted sci-fi, grungy, I guess, like more practical transformation. They're different. They represent different things. They kind of represent those two, the yin and yang of the Winx Club story, I suppose. And they are the two main transformations of the whole thing. So yeah, that was the decision there. So I hope you guys don't hate me for it. Another question I've seen a lot is Valtor, why he appears or is hinted at so early at the story. And the answer is very simple. Valtor is my favorite villain. in the entire Winx Club universe. And so in the Winx Chronicles, he is basically the central villain. He's the central antagonist. He is a very, very important character that you already know actually loads about, but you just don't know know loads about him yet. And I'm just going to leave that at that for you to ponder on, because I've told you guys so much about Valtor already. If you've been watching like the Book of Lore and Welcome to Althea and you've read the book, you know so much about him. So I'm just going to leave that there. So yeah, he's going to be a very, very background antagonist though for the first half of the series. So he will eventually come in full force, however he's very background. I've also seen some speculation about Daphne, particularly how powerful she is. And it's one of the questions I'm not going to answer right now because, again, I know how Daphne does what she does, but you do not know how Daphne does what she does. And that's the point. So just rest in the knowledge that I know, and it will make sense, I promise. Another question I've been asked a few times, both in my Instagram and my YouTube comments, is will there be more like mini-series or something along those lines for book 2? I don't really know yet. I have ideas. I've been thinking. I can't lie. I have been thinking. My little brain has been going. They were a lot of fun for me to make, and in many ways they came from work I'd already done early in the writing process originally, and I felt like they were really important to kind of like set up the world and do a lot of that groundwork for me, because I'm not a talented enough writer just to put that in the book, and I felt like you guys needed to know a lot of this stuff. So it was a good way for me to do that. So the miniseries were just a way of me sharing that. However, if there is kind of that opportunity does present itself again, I definitely think that I'm amenable to the idea, and I don't want to say I'm not going to do more. I'm just not going to confirm either way right now. They're just ideas, to be transparent. They're just ideas in my head. Whether I just focus on book 2 or just do a little bit of extra writing on the side remains to be seen. Okay, so now I'm just going to get into, so those were the comments I kind of like saw a lot of. Now I'm going to get into some of your individual comments from YouTube and Instagram. Someone asks, if I could change or add anything to book 1, what would I do? If I could add anything to book 1, I think I would add more character moments, more individual stories, and probably pad out Act 3 a little bit more, because I feel like Act 3 is so fast. I know why I didn't do that, but I do feel like I really wish I kind of went back in and added more. In terms of changing, I think I would have changed how I approached my prose. I think I spoke a little bit about this on my Instagram, but I feel like I really over-edited a lot of the first half of the book, and to write the book, I used Scrivener, and then in Hemingway, I would go in, and Hemingway is an app. It's brilliant, by the way. If you're a writer, you should look into Hemingway. It's just a website. It's free. You can pay for it, but there's no point. You get all the stuff that you need for free. And it will basically just highlight where you used passive voice, where your sentences are long, all of this stuff. And I think early on I was like, I don't want any really long sentences. So I tried to get everything like in the green, basically. And that's just not right. And again, it was me being an amateur writer, and it's me learning along the way. So I think just the first half of the book really does feel so much more sterile than the second half. And I know book 1 in general is going to feel very sterile when I eventually get around to book 2. But again, it's just like part of me learning to be a writer, and, I've made mistakes and it's not perfect. However, that's part of the process, and I'm learning to be okay with that. But that's definitely something I would change going back. I just would not, censor myself as much, and I would, lean more into that more kind of flowery writing style that I really do like, to be honest with you. I've had a lot of questions along the lines of season 4, season 5, are they going to be very similar, to season 4 in Winx? So there's going to be more lore from the other seasons. I know, people know, obviously I've said multiple times I'm only adapting 1 to 3 in the first movie. And the short answer is I have thought about it, and the answer is no. I just wouldn't expect it. Season 4, for me, I actually have an idea as to how I can do that. But it's not a Winx Club story. I can't describe that in any other way other than the Winx. This isn't for them. This is a separate story that occurs in the same world. And maybe it's kind of like an after the Winx Chronicles thing, but it's not a Winx Club story. So yeah, unfortunately, if you're a fan of season 4, I love season 4, don't get me wrong, or season 5 onward, it's just not really going to be much of that. Maybe you'll see like a couple of things here and there. Obviously, one of the moons is called Lumen. But yeah, as far as season 4 and 5 goes, just don't expect it. If you want season 5 or 6 rewrites that are good, I've recommended them before, I'll recommend them again, is Thomas's from Unicorn of War. Their rewrites of these seasons are amazing. They have my stamp of approval. So if you want that sort of thing, go over there, because you're not going to be getting it from the Winx Chronicles. But yeah, I would hold for bated breath on season 4, but put a big question mark over that and just wait until, you know, however many years time when I end up finishing the whole series. You might get something after that. Might. So another question I got, how did I come up with different plot points and what was the approach to each one? So I spoke about this briefly earlier, but how I went about the story was I used the Save the Cat plot beats, which I think are so useful for planning a story in general. Again, if you're interested in doing anything like this with your story, I would highly recommend starting there. That's what I used. I would just make sure that my story was kind of hitting these kind of beats in the story, in the narrative. In terms of how I came up with the story, in the beginning, I listed out all of the scenes and the episodes from Winx Club. And I still have this, actually. Still have this document. And I basically picked out, I was like, okay, how are we going to work this in? How are we going to, you know, kind of make this go into the story? And if you really look, you'll see how each of the moments and where they come from Winx Club. You know, like obviously you have their trip to Na'vi in like, you know, when they get to Althea, which is meant to be them going shopping for Bloom's dress in episode 2, and you've got them meeting each other. You have that quintessential scene. You've got the, obviously episode 1 is basically the first 6 chapters. You've got the gala, which obviously is like episode 3 of Winx Club. You have got their expedition to Cloud Tower where they go and save Griffin. Again, very, very, very similar. You've got their mission to Domino, which they do in season 1. It's just not the ending of season 1, but they do that. Yeah, so a lot of the scenes are still preserved. Like the date with Bloom happens. Yeah, you know, Bloom in the library happens. Her looking up over these things happens. The you know, Solarian mission is a little bit different. But instead of it happening at like Red Fountain, it happens in the Solarian Palace. But otherwise, it works as a play-by-play. But other than the fact that in obviously the Winx Chronicles, they're not there to chase the boys. They're there on their own mission, and it just so happens that they find out about the boys along the way. So that's kind of how I did it, and it's kind of how I'm going to do more the books in the future. However, as the books go on, I would say that it gets less and less like less and less predictable. Like you would have seen less and less. I think book 1 has the most from Winx Club that you will see. Book 2 and book 3 also has a lot, but once we get to book 4, 5, 6, it's going to be basically new stuff, besties. So yeah, buckle down is all I have to say. Someone said, this comment made me laugh actually. Is Enchantix the final stage of Fairy, or are you just playing? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to answer that question, which I feel like is an answer in and of itself. But let's just say, yes, Enchantix is the actual final stage of a Fairy. But it's like, yes, lowercase in italics. Question mark. ... Do you know what I mean? I'm just going to say that. So anyway, we're moving on. Do you have any ideas of integrating the Charmix bags and brooches into the books? Yes. I loved the fact that someone gave me this question because it's literally what I've been doing for the past 2 weeks is plotting book 2. So yes, book 2, get excited about it because I'm really excited about it. And low-key, when I came up with it, I was like, wow, Josh, you're so smart. I really had to give myself a good pat on the back for that one. And I really hope you guys are going to like it because I was kind of obsessed with my mind when I came up with it. Originally, no, by the way. Originally, like, asked me this question a year ago. No, this was a recent development for book 2, which makes so much sense. I'm so excited about it. Anyway, so thank you to who asked that question because I'm so excited about that. Anyway, any chances of getting LGBT characters? Now listen, I also got another question along this lines of what ships are canon. I am not a romance author. I don't really like romance that much. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. If you guys love Winx for the romance, I fear you're not going to get much of it. There is going to be romance, but I kind of cringe when I'm writing it. And it's only going to exist insofar as I want to stay true to the characters. So in terms of ships, it's very much like the originals. You know, if like they're going to end up with the same people they ended up with in the original series. I'm not changing anything. And in terms of LGBT characters, you've met 2 already. Because Farragonda and Griffin is all I have to say on that one. But that is very much in the subtext. And some of you have picked up on it because I've had conversations with you on that subtext. but it's not really a relationship that gets explored in the Winx Chronicles. You know, it's kind of just there in the background for you to pick up on or not. Okay, next question. Will there be more lore on the Phoenix? And in book 1, I described Darkar, but it ended up being Baltor. Have you unified their characters into one ultimate villain? To answer the first half of that question, which I think was from one person, but I combined these into like one question. Will there be more lore on the Phoenix? Yes, there will. But I'm going to leave that there. And then in terms of Darkar and Baltor, they are separate characters, but they are meant to evoke imagery of one another. Again, I will leave that there because that's major spoilers, which we're not doing yet. I got these questions about Bloom. Someone wanted to know about the Dominion-style dress that was given by Signora Alessandra. Now, I'm sorry if this caused confusion for anybody. What the intention of the scene was meant to be is that Signora Alessandra obviously would have, in my head, in order to design this dress, looked at many, many, many old books of Dominions in this style of dress. So when she designed it, and she would have seen a certain, obviously, set of features and certain hair color or what have you, reflected in the designs that in the pictures that she was working from. So when she saw Bloom, who's obviously the closest to what those pictures would have been, she was like, "Oh my God, you look like them," which is kind of like a subtle hint at foreshadowing. It was my attempt. Whether I was successful or not, it's up to you guys on that one. Another part of that question was, what inspired me to change Bloom's origin from being sent to Earth as a baby to being sent there as a toddler? This is because, as I spoke about earlier, one of the really big themes of the book is fate and destiny and choice. And I felt as though Bloom having more of an active role, even if it's just a little bit, being able to remember, being able to kind of grasp onto it, actually being part of that, being able to converse with Daphne and having a relationship with her, that was actually personal, was all very important for how the story develops. So that was kind of why that decision occurred. I just felt like her being a baby, she wasn't going to be able to remember anything. But her being a toddler, it kind of made sense to me that she wouldn't really remember this as something that really happened when all she knew for most of her life was normalcy. So yeah, I just really liked the idea that she had a little bit more of an active role there. Do you know what I mean? The final part of that question was, Vanessa's family is stated to be from Hawaii. Is she native Hawaiian? Yes, she is. She is native Hawaiian. Again, it's not something I put necessarily like really far in the forefront, like I didn't explicitly state it, but she is. I'm glad that was picked up on. I think it has informed aspects of her personality, but it's definitely aspects of it. I'm not educated enough to write a character where this is a really, really prominent, cultural representation of the native Hawaiians at all, and it's definitely not my place to do so. However, having her in there as a character and from that place, I think is important. What inspired the choice of Bloomstown in this version? Honestly, I just really liked the imagery of the redwood trees. Call me Taylor Swift. Redwood tree ain't hard to see is all I have to say. And I was like, what town is near Mulewoods? And then that's how I got there. I'm sorry if that's really disappointing or lackluster, but that is unfortunately the truth there. Some decisions were very, very thought out in the Winx Chronicles. Others were because it's pretty. Are there surviving Dominions? Is that a distinct ethnicity or race, such as that Bloom would look Dominion to someone who knew what they were looking for? Yeah, like insofar as, people from different places have different features, definitely Bloom has the Dominion features, like her hair, for instance, is one of them. We're going to be going to Prometia in the next book, so more to come. Is the role of royalty similar across magics? For example, are all princesses who are arcanists guardians, or are just some more like celebrities akin to British royals? So the role of royalty in the Winx Chronicles is very interesting. The answer is no. Most princesses are not guardians. Stella is an exception to the rule, generally speaking, and also a lot of realms and magics don't have monarchies. Most royals is quite contentious in most places. The role of royals in magics is just not similar at all. They're very, very different depending on where they're from and what realm they are in. Could you clarify what transformation currently entails? Wings, of course, but does anything else about the person's appearance change? So transformation, magic Winx, Charmix, whatever you want to call it, most of the person doesn't change. They definitely have I tried to describe like an aura. There's like a feeling that emanates from someone of strength when they transform. but nothing changes, no costume change, nothing like that. It's just the wings. Later on, transformation is different, as in Enchantix is different. But again, I spoke about that a little bit earlier. So, and I think also I touched upon this earlier, was a lot of people have asked me why I changed the scale of the magical dimension. And I guess I'll reiterate, like, a lot of the original, Winx Club Bible, like, there just isn't a lot there. There just isn't a lot there from the original show, and I had to fill up a lot of even the realms. So yeah, we'll definitely be leaving magics and exploring more places. My goal with the Winx Chronicles was never to stay faithful to the exact plot beat for beat. It was more important to me to stay faithful to what the story was saying, what it felt like, what it valued, what it meant emotionally. And I wanted to keep the femininity and the sparkle and the heart and the sense of wonder. And I wanted to keep the moments that actually say something about the characters. I also didn't want to be restricted to the exact structure of the original show, because ultimately, if you want the original show, it's right there. I think of the Winx Chronicles almost as saying a lot of the same things, just through a different lens. And what it's saying is very Winx. However, every decision I've made surrounding it has been to aid what I'm trying to convey in particular that's different to the original Winx Club, if that makes sense. So I suppose that brings us to the end of this little behind the scenes look. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's listened to the audiobook, who's read the story, who's left comments, theories, messages, or just shared their excitement about the project along the way. Seeing people engage with this world and these characters has honestly been one of the most surreal, incredible things ever. I'm just genuinely grateful to so many people. Just thank you for supporting this project from the very beginning, from now, and from then until now, for 5 years, 1 year, for a week, however long it's been. Genuinely, I'm so grateful. To Lola, to Jake, to Faye, Thomas, Lisa, Stella from Stella's Winx Club, Lucy, who created the book cover. So many people who've helped along the way. I just want to say thank you again. There are probably so many people I'm forgetting, so many people who have had conversations with in my DMs, and people who've commented on my videos over and over and over again. Thank you, truly. This has been a long journey, and having people believe in the project whilst it's taking shape is honestly why it got to this point. And of course, the story is not finished yet. A lot of people have been asking what they can expect from book 2, which is titled Secrets. And I have already started working on it. It's bigger, it's denser, it's character focused, and it starts to reveal the direction of the overall series. It's going to definitely give more of that bigger vibe. It's going to feel a lot less constrained than book 1. We're going to be spending more time with characters like Musa, Flora, Tekna, and of course Aisha, and you'll learn about larger pieces of the story and how they're going to fit together. We're going to be getting new characters, familiar faces, lots of development from the world. We're going to be solving more plot holes that Rainbow has very kindly left for me to fix in their wake. And I'm very excited for book 2, but I'm probably most excited for people to eventually experience book 3, because book 3 is where the groundwork from the first 2 really pays off, and you get launched into what I consider the Winx Chronicles project to be. I'm just very excited. For now, very much the focus is on book 2. There's so much more story to tell, and we're only just getting started. And if you'd like to keep up with the project as it continues, the best place to do that is on Instagram. I post so much there. You can direct message me there. I respond to everybody. I put stuff about the writing process and announcements about future releases on there. So if you're interested in following the journey, that is the place to go. And on that note, thank you for listening to this making of episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing a bit more about the story behind the Winx Chronicles, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.